Oh, there we go. Didn't even realize that transition in. So, hello, good afternoon from me, and good morning to you, Carrie.
Morning, how are you?
Doing pretty well. I think I know that you have a new place that you're calling home now since the last time we've done a stream. So you get change up the background and everything else.
Yeah, I probably should work on making it a little bit more camera friendly.
You got to get one of those. I know you like to do art illustrations. You should eventually or you could eventually get like a whole bunch of backgrounds that you've illustrated yourself and have those as like hot swap things that you could put on as those virtual backgrounds.
That sounds like a pretty decent idea.
Right? I
Yeah.
forget who it was, but there was somebody on the Microsoft Cat team, I think, where every time he visited a Microsoft office, he actually took a photo of like one of the office spaces there, and he had a collection of photos that he used as his backgrounds from various Microsoft offices he's visited around the world.
Hmm. That might cause quite a bit of confusion.
By
He'll
one
be
of them
in
just
Tokyo
random.
and he's got a
Well,
picture of
true.
an office from the US.
Oh, exactly. But it's well, he was his own version of having a fun way to do some uh, themed backgrounds that was his rather than necessarily something that is just generically from their little list of curated pictures.
It's almost like capturing postcards.
Uh, a little bit, yeah. I mean, it's something to collect at the end of the day,
Yeah.
which certainly is fun, yeah. In his case, it's Zoom and Teams backgrounds.
Yeah, I like that idea. I'll think
This
about
is
it.
your I think this is your second or third time on one of our streams.
Uh, two and a half.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Exactly. You got to work in parts, and then at some point we could do a short recorded video, and then we'll collectively have three streams worth of content. Give round the number up.
Yeah, I'm starting to get a little bit more practiced in these live streams and things. The nervousness and is diminishing. So
It's with anything, right? It's getting familiarity with a certain type of mental muscle to a degree. I know the first time I walked on stage of any type, like I feel like I lost like 3 pounds of water weight through sweat, just like on stage. Like no lie. Like there's a degree of like for the first few times that I went on, I learned quickly to wear clothing that didn't make it as obvious if I was sweaty. I think I had a white shirt on the first time I did that, and it was very apparent early on that I did a good job, but you could tell that I was just my body basically it already runs as a furnace, and it needs very little motivation to go into overdrive when it comes to just overheating quite easily. So
yeah, the opposite problem to me. I'm always shivering. So yeah, even on stage, right?
exactly. But I think also for before we get into the topic of like visuals design and some creativity, do you want to give a little background on yourself, kind of, and especially like what you're doing these days with work and everything else?
Yes. I guess I work in the business intelligence space, in a business intelligence management role, but my specialty has been for the last few years data visualization. Data visualization is mostly a hobby for me. I wish it was a little bit more than that, but that's what it is. I guess I enjoy it. I do it in my spare time. Shouldn't really work in my spare time, but I do. So, um, and yeah, and I do a little bit of independent data visualization work as well.
Okay. I mean, you're still one of the blogs that I usually reference. Links for the people watching or now or the recording later down in the description. But you definitely do a lot of cool ideas and creativity with the SVGs that you've made. I think unless you know of anybody else, I think you have the most robust collection, at least, of those kind of inline SVG images ever since we got that customized view box that we could build into
Mm,
the native visuals a year and a half ago. You added a whole bunch of different types into there, which I think really gave people a lot of like copy paste templates, which was super useful for sure.
yeah, it takes a while to build an SVG
Yeah.
DAX measure. Right, building the SVG is the easy part, right? Just building a circle, building a line, but it's building that logic behind it takes quite a while.
Mhm.
And so I found that just having a simple template to copy paste and then tweak and adjust helped not only me, but helps others get along much more quickly.
Yep.
And the more that there are, the quicker, work is.
And I mean, you even helped me when I was also trying to update some of mine a year and a half ago. Like I had a line chart where 95% of the time it worked, but every once in a while, like one of the dots that was supposed to be the max, like was on a random spot on the chart. Like it's easy to get bugs in those for sure, especially if you're doing more complicated things. I worked with Daniel on an integrated bullet chart, trying to go for IBCS and with like a goal marker and all that other stuff. And the whether or not it's through custom visual or SVG, and yourself included, we've all seen like how complicated it is to get something to work properly and to scale and appropriately ratio and place the object or the element of the chart, whatever you're building, in the right spot and have the right colors and all that. It's a really bespoke process, and there a lot of it is the logic on the size and the placement of within the view box of where it goes. So templates are fantastic.
The positioning.
The positioning, yeah. But like you said, you don't need to know how to build a car to drive it. And I think SVGs are a great example of those things where you don't have to understand the 140, 160 lines of code that might be in some of those little copy paste things, but there's notes to say replace X, Y, and Z, and it's going to basically kind of work with whatever is in your model. So it's nice to be able to at least reduce the complexity. Same thing with visual, with tabular editor in C#. I am not a C# writer by any means, but I know enough of it to copy and paste code and swap out the values that I need to for the column names and whatever it is, and then run the script. So the SVGs to me follow a similar process of all you need to know is enough to plug in your data for it to work typically.
Yeah, and it's quite structured as well. So once you sort of get the general gist and the pattern of things, it's easy to sort of pick up and add to and tweak and things like that as well. So having that really structured language, I don't think it's really a language, certainly helps as well.
Exactly. Speaking of them too, and also just considering that we're both visual learners, if you're ready, we can maybe flip over to some of the slides and start talking about some of the ideas behind the building visuals and creativity, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure.
All right, let me get over to this. There we are.
Excellent. Oh no, I've got two screens that show me exactly the same thing. I'm a little bit confused. I don't know where to look. So I guess one of the things that I wanted to talk about today as well, we met at the MVP Summit in Seattle, and we got on to the discussion of SVG games and DAX games. And I thought I would talk today about some of those things, but with the spin of how through making DAX games and playing in Power BI, that helped me learn about SVGs. And sort of, I'm going to talk to you loosely today about the process of going from not knowing much about SVGs at all and how that's helped develop and advance my data visualization knowledge and skill set to where I am today as well. So I'm going to probably walk through that sort of process of learning about SVGs and then also at the end showing some of these microcharts that I've created and some of these dashboards that I've created and the practical uses of what I've learned right through the play, right? So I've done impractical things through play to sort of test the tool set, to test my knowledge, test my skills, to sort of think outside of the box a little bit, and then applied it practically. So I guess one of the things I want to talk about is, creating games and how that helps me in my learning types, right? So, a lot of people, we all learn in different ways. Some of us are very audio. Some of us will scroll through tons and tons of YouTube videos. We'll happily sit in lectures and conferences, in meetings and listen and learn. That's not my style. I'm not an audio person, and I struggle very, very much with that kind of thing. And I do apologize for all the people where I've fallen asleep in their lectures. But I find it very difficult to pay attention unless I'm physically doing something like I'm doodling or drawing and things, and that helps me retain the information and the knowledge and sort of also think about and process the information that's happening within my brain. And so my preference is, visual, but also hands-on and sort of kinesthetic. So for me to learn, I kind of need to do and play and tweak and, recognize patterns and things like that. And, also with play as well, right, there comes an element of fun and humor. And so that opens up this realm for creativity, which is something that John Cleese has spoken really quite well on, and how humor is good for creativity, creates an open mindset, and, it also makes work fun, builds connections, and all this kind of stuff as well. So SVGs, I'm not quite sure who's in the audience, but I don't know what level to be talking at, but SVGs are scalable vector graphics. And the difference between SVGs and PNG is that they scale at all different sizes. And if you were to enlarge a raster image or a PNG, right, it would become really quite grainy. And if you were to sort of open a PNG in a text file, you're not really going to understand what's beneath it. It's all this sort of hieroglyph behind it. But you open an SVG in a text file and you can read what's in the SVG. So here we've got certain shapes with points, and then we can see they're colored by certain hex codes. And these are quite useful because we can then edit these SVGs quite programmatically. So there's various sort of elements of SVGs. So here we've got some basic shapes that form SVGs, circles, ellipses, lines, polygons, polylines, and rectangles. And then each of these shapes have attributes that we can modify: the fill colors, stroke colors, the stroke dashes, positions, and widths, heights, and rounded corners, arcs and things like that. And then each of these shapes, any of these attributes of these shapes can then be also animated as well, which is kind of very, very useful. And SVGs are basically, the building blocks of a lot of common web-based charting libraries, things like D3 and Vue.js and a few others as well, because of this ability to modify as well. And there's some great places to learn about SVGs. So this W3 Schools is one of those. And we can go through and sort of understand the structure of them. So, a simple SVG rectangle.
W3 is really good for many. Years ago I used it for like SQL tutorials, like anything code based. I feel like it does a really good job of walking you through how to learn a language.
Yeah, it's very good because you can then also try them yourself. So here's an example here, which have your basic SVG container. I don't know if that's the right word here. And then we've got the rectangle element with width, height, and then we've got the positioning of the coordinates, so where they're placed on the page. And these RX values are the rounded edges values, and we can fill that with blue. And here again was a rectangle with a border, so we can change the style of the stroke and the stroke width color. And again, also we can do a rectangle. We can change the opacity like so. And we can go into an editor and start to play around with the colors here and the opacity and modify them. So we can change the positioning.
That's nice.
And then
it's like I've never actually used one of these sandboxes before. I've only done this when I was doing it in Power BI, and it sometimes just breaks it versus other stuff. So like getting that real time feedback, it helps a lot. Yeah, because I've only dabbled in this stuff, and like it's one of the reasons I love Denim so much is you make a change, you instantly see the result in the visual container next to it. But this is giving you that similar real time feedback essentially.
Yeah, and then you can layer as well. So we've got here, one rectangle. I've just created another one. And we can see, we can change that to a circle. I don't know what that's going to look like with the, might want to change the C, X, and the, is it C, CX, CY? No, that doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't want to do that. I've got something wrong in here.
And James just had a quick question on do you use the sandbox like this when you're designing SVGs for Power BI? So would you use the would you use the code that eventually ends up in a measure for Power BI in here?
I may have done in the past, but I've got most of this down pat in my head now that I don't feel that I need to, except for I've forgotten the R. But
because the one difference, go ahead.
Certainly helpful when you're sort of first getting used to it and first learning.
The only thing you'd have to do is otherwise, like, because I assume you could, but if you had like a variance bar, just as an example, or a line chart, you would have to provide all the hard-coded values almost, though, to get it to render, because it's not pulling anything from a measure.
Correct. So I think if you were to create a new sparkline from scratch, you might start from within here, and then you would use DAX to modify all those values, right?
Yep.
So you could start here. For example, if you want a polyline, would be what you would want to create, say, a simple sparkline, and you can take. So these are the points, X, Y points already in here. So with your DAX measure, you would want to then use data to define those X and Y points. So you can come in here and sort of start from there, and then build out the colors or whatever it is that you wanted to do. Maybe you wanted to start with a oops, let me get rid of that. The other one. And maybe you wanted to put a target line or a band on the background, target area at the background, and you can sort of play around in that style and then bring that into your DAX measure and then work backwards.
Okay.
So that's sort of the basic elements of SVG. And I guess where I started with SVG in my development, so this was going back to 2018, some of the first steps that I took in this area was when I had a templated Power BI file for project portfolio, and I had this sort of stacked bar chart for looking at the number of projects by project governance phase, which really wasn't doing an awful lot for me or my users in terms of visualizing where projects were in the portfolio pipeline, because we were all very, very used to seeing this sort of, what do you call that, chevron image in all of our communications across the business. And so what I wanted to do was include that in our Power BI reporting, just to get that continuation and congruency with our reporting and what people were used to seeing. And so to do that, I had to use the synoptic panel at the time, and then I encoded each of these chevrons with a sort of sequential color coding scheme to sort of indicate the magnitude of projects across each of the phases. And looking at a report similar to this one here, obviously it's not dummy, it's all dummy data, it's not real data. And then having a basic sort of timeline sort of listed at the bottom as well. And the next thing I did was also building on something that David Eldersveld had done. Oh, my memory is detected. Let's get rid of that. So one of the other things with this program portfolio is that, with project KPIs and project indicators, these sort of circular RAG indicators, you know, they're okay, but there was quite a lot of cognitive load to try and consume this information. So if we're looking at each project, we're doing a lot of looking up, looking down. You know, our eyes are doing a lot of work, trying to remember what KPI each circle is indicating, and then trying to compare and contrast across the KPIs. You know, we're holding that in our memory. And with the percentage completes for various project indicators as well, what we're doing is we're seeing the percentages, and in our heads, we're trying to convert that visually so we can picture the magnitude and percentage of completion in our heads. So we're trying to do all that in our head. So one of those things is I'm trying to make this a little bit more visual. And so turning those circles into icons, which you know, people could become familiar with. That would then, you know, reduce the cognitive load, and it made it a lot easier to compare across all of these indicators. And then using Unicode characters at the time, because matrices could only have square SVGs as well to sort of visualize those percentages. And so we can, you know, easily see here that this particular project was overdue on milestones and budget. And we can see that we've overrun on the budget, and, you know, we're halfway complete. So that was sort of my first foray. So with SVGs, I learned, you know, the shapes and the color fills. And it really wasn't until, you know, this HTML content visual by Daniel Marsh-Patrick came out that included measure support, did I really get the opportunity to really want to explore that further. And so when that came out, you know, that's when I really started to play in that space, right? So I didn't have immediate uses in production reports, but I didn't know what I could do with it. So I wanted to explore that, and I explored that through playing a number of, creating a number of games through Power BI to explore the, you know, how I could use SVGs in my data visualizations.
I love just as a second shout out just to Daniel on like making that, because it really, I've only dabbled in it compared to, like, I know you and Mike Carlo have spent a lot of and many others have spent a lot of time really just making some very bespoke looking fun fancy Power BI reports, because you can pretty much code anything inside of there with a mix of HTML and anything that you can pull out of your model via a measure, right?
Yeah, the only thing that I wish I could do is scripts and JavaScript. I think that would be
Fair.
blinking amazing. But that's where DAX can kind of help with that a little bit, in, you know, creating those animations and movements and repeated values.
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah. So one of the first things then I looked at, right, so I'd done SVGs with shape, and I've done SVGs with color fill. And so one of the first things I decided to do was try and look at, so how can I have SVGs, how can I create SVGs and drive the size, the width, and the length of those with data? And so one of those things that I did was I started with a very small SVG rectangle shape, and I obtained a data set on lies, and this data set for each of the years this data set goes, I'm not explaining this very well, I'll get there eventually. The rectangle would increase in width by the number of lies told.
This is really entertaining.
Do you know what? There are so many lies it goes over the page.
Does it actually go to the very end of the page?
Oh yeah. There's not enough room on the page.
It's really funny. Regardless of political affiliation or whatever you might have, as just a concept of a fun page, this is really entertaining. Very, very much kudos on that. That's fine.
Yeah, so here we can see that, you know, 166 lies, and then the rectangle has increased by a number of like 166 coordinates or points on that SVG. So yeah, and that was really good. I was getting excited by that. Hey, data-driven SVG, right? And so this is the beginning of my exploration into data visualization. So no formal training at this point or anything. So I didn't have any of that foundational knowledge. So this is me building that foundational knowledge. So when the next kind of thing that I wanted to learn from that was, okay, rotation. You know, how can I do data-driven rotation? And so the clock hands here, for example, so for each hour through the data set, the clock hands would rotate. And that was a little bit tricky because I kind of had to learn that every time I rotated a shape, I also needed to translate it back to a certain position. Otherwise, they'd scatter everywhere like Picasso shapes. But it wasn't too hard to sort of get a grip on once I'd done that. So another learning outcome from that. Pattern fill as well. So one of the things that Power BI didn't have was pattern fill. I did wonder why that wasn't available. It's available in, oh, hello, Excel, for example. So filling the shapes with SVG patterns, and then also here with the SVGs before. So the previous SVGs that I had in a matrix, were measure driven. These ones were hand-drawn SVGs that I used in the Power BI theme template. So I embedded them into the JSON, which I took from both yourself and a Power BI tips on how to do that as well. So another learning outcome from that. And also, I think in another thing, I was trying to play with Google Fonts as well and bringing that in.
I like the just the hand-drawn aspects is fun, I think, for sure. So you said did you just grab them from a library? Did you actually draw it? You hand drew them?
I hand drew them on a tablet or in PowerPoint, and then saved them as an SVG, and then uploaded them into that JSON theme file.
So the 6 p.m. mark, is that you had 5 glasses of wine?
Yeah, it's not real data, but yes, that's the joke.
You got, so I see latte. Break. Or what's the first one? Is that latte?
Yeah, it's a coffee.
Coffee, okay. Yep.
Toilet break, quite a few cups of teas, another coffee, 1 glass of water, which is kind of typical. I don't drink enough water in the day. And then 6 p.m., end of work. And then a hangover. So not a typical day.
James just wants to appreciate the clock face. Like, I think that's a fun way to have something next to the play axis, especially if you're using them together, where you can watch the clock like actually slowly, in fast movements, like spin around as the time goes throughout the day.
Yeah, and you can animate these clocks as well. I think I'd done another one similarly in a different data visualization where I did speed dating. And so I had this clock countdown. So you can do timings and animations in SVG as well. So you can have the clock countdown. And so the whole point was to read through the data story on speed dating in the time it takes to speed date, which is 2 or 4 minutes as well, which is, that was kind of fun. And so this one, so these aren't really quite games yet. So I've got a few games coming up, but it's more sort of playfulness. This one was mostly around polygon shapes, right? So this was before I was on Twitter, before I followed Information is Beautiful or anything kind of like that. And I was starting to think a little bit more artistically in terms of data-driven shapes and things like that. So it was not really playing very well. And I wanted to see if I could create shapes that were unusual that I could make data-driven. So each of those turbines, for example, represents an Australian state. And there's 2 points on this polygon path that will be driven by data. And that represents the percentage of whatever it was that I was calculating here. And so for each year, the turbine will rotate and then also scale out based on the percentage. And then there was also sort of playing with the text and making the text rotate with the turbines as well as data labels. And you can see here I've also got ARIA labels as well as sort of tooltips. I'll try that again, see if that works. There we go. So also playing with arcs as well, which were incredibly tricky to do. I've tried to leverage other people's works on creating pie charts in SVGs, but it just wasn't working for me. It was something that I really had to just go back to high school maths and, nudge it out myself. But I eventually got there. And then also playing with masking and clip path, where you can have your rectangle shapes upwards, but then using rectangles to cover and mask these things as well. So I played with a lot of different things in this one, which was fun and interesting, and was useful further on in some practical applications, particularly with these polygons, polylines, and polygon shapes, right? And then coming on to sort of my first proper game as well with DAX. So this one was done in the HTML content visual. And with this one, the focus was on animations and filtering effects. So with this one, it's a game I just sort of created myself. It's got no background. So here we put a doubles multiplier. So when you roll doubles, you pop in how much you want to multiply the points. But each time you multiply the points, you'll get a points deduction from your total score. You can go into play, and so you're playing against an opponent here, and it's all random. So I used some DAX functions I hadn't got to use before, and working out how random worked and sort of how visuals refresh and execute. I didn't actually have that understanding. And this game helped me have that understanding and realizing that I needed to put all of these into one measure, because you can't really store the random values. And then I've got this sort of blackboard here where I created a chart. So this was my first sort of, no, it wasn't my first chart, but I created a filter effect over these rectangles and text to create this chalky look on this background here. And so again, all these numbers here were randomly generated and then visualized in an SVG. And we've got a couple of different sort of animation effects here, right? So we've got rotation, we've got fade, and we've got sort of pulsation there as well. Yeah.
Nice. Just as an anecdote on that, a couple of years ago, I used to be like in a D&D group with a friend, and he wouldn't. The guy who ran the game would not let us use digital die rollers, because technically, like, he goes in like, it's not actually truly random. It's picking from a list. Like, you have to roll a physical dice, because a computer algorithm, I guess, doesn't properly do complete random. It goes off of some equation that it does, but I guess it's quote unquote not true random. But I found that it was an interesting nitpick, or just pet peeve to have.
Yeah, there's actually, if you go into the back of this one, I think if we go here at the back, I've got this whole frequency, right?
Oh, nice.
It doubles. Okay. So, where I went to see and test, how random it actually was. Yeah, I don't know where it's gone. But yeah, it's not 100%, right? There is some sort of bias.
Yeah, I know if you roll if you have it to run you roll a six-sided die like a million times, it won't actually be, the distribution will definitely be different from a real world scenario. And like it will be, I think it's 2 even, if you actually do that or something like that, where there's always going to be a little bit of bias of things that eventually swing to one side, outside of the statistical probability or something in the real world, versus the machine, which like does it too evenly.
Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, and then again, this was playing with a visual that Daniel created, and sort of looking at importing custom texts. So here the XKC text, which I think is disordered, right? So which then, oh, and it's not going to work, is it? Yeah, never mind. It's all out of order. And then, so this game, so the dice game I sort of shared on LinkedIn, and Phil CMark contacted me for this game and was interested in creating this game that he had in his backlog for quite some time. It's something that he wanted to do. So the mastermind behind Mastermind. And this one was a collaboration with Phil. And so it was kind of crazy looking at his DAX and trying to understand like how his mind worked. And with that, there was quite a lot of disconnected tables in the background, some funky DAX functions that I learned a bit from. So with regards to SVG, I didn't do an awful lot or learn an awful lot in this particular game, except for, applying some drop shadow effects. But what I did learn is how much I dislike bookmarks. So Phil used a lot of bookmarks, 100 or so, I got no idea, in here. And when he passed the game over 100? For me to, something ridiculous. When he passed the game over for me to decorate, I broke them twice. And so that was a pain point and a frustration, but it was a good pain point and frustration to learn, as it helped me in production Power BI reports in future, being conscious of how you can't really document bookmarks, and the maintenance of them is really, really quite high. And so that was a really good learning from that as well. So this is a pretty cool game. So don't know if you've played Mastermind before. Have you done that?
The game name sounds really familiar, and I think at one point in the 90s there was like a digital version of it where it was still a physical device, but you could push buttons and it put places. But it's a puzzle game where you have to do certain patterns, right?
Yeah. So we've got here that green is the correct pin in the correct place, red is the correct pin in the incorrect place, and white is the incorrect color. Let's see how we go. My daughter loves this game.
Does she actually play the? Does she play the one that you built, or does she play like an actual one?
No. She played this one. Oh, I only get to see the answers at the end of the game, right?
That's fun.
She loved it. Absolutely loved it. So yeah, and then coming on from that one, so Phil created this game with a lot of disconnected tables, and then this was before the field parameters came out, right? So when field parameters came out, I thought, how can I use that? How does it work? What are the constraints? What are the limitations? I'll test that in a game. And so I built this Wordle thing using field parameters, but also this was an opportunity for me to learn Tabular Editor, right? So creating all those disconnected tables manually was a little bit ridiculous. So that's when I picked up Tabular Editor and sort of learned to use that as well. It's not really a word. So there's actual words in the background of this. So I generated a lot of Power BI themed words. So if I were to go, say, query, I think is one. And if you guess the word that's been randomly collected, you'll get points. Let's go.
Query.
Yeah. So there's a ton of Power BI words in the back, right? And then you've got to work out. I don't know what that would be.
So it ends in ERY, or ERY is just part of it?
No, so I'd say, so yellow is, it's the right letter, but in the wrong place. So we've got AERY. green would be the correct letter in the correct
so
place.
all of the so you have all but one of the letters.
Yeah. So what do you think that would be a Power BI related word? I haven't played this in ages. I don't remember any of them.
YEARS, years.
Years? Let's give that a go.
Will Thompson's helping me with some guesses in the chat.
Let's give that a go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Because they're all in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
It could be reordered. Yeah.
No.
So it is. What other word it comes? What other letter can go out? Oh no! So the only one that's in the right spot. No, none of them are in the right spot. An S is wrong.
Yeah.
That's really. I was just thinking the same thing, Will. So he was like, "Wouldn't it be great to have search in the slicer?" I would say the only downside is it's I think it's such a narrow slicer. I don't know if it'd be easy to type that in there or not, but half my brain is just like I just really want to solve this.
Let's see if it starts with E. Let's give that a go.
I feel like EAR is in the right order.
No, it's not E. So E must be here. And this is where I'll see if the game's broken. Ready? Aha, the game isn't broken.
So there's put the Y after E. Well, actually no, what I don't even know where the Y would go. EY maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, layers. Is it layers?
That would be LAYER, layer, LAYER.
There's no S.
Yeah, LAYER, layer.
It's a bit slow because my browser's got tons of tabs open. Let's give this a
Now
go.
that we're actually playing games, I feel like we should technically be streaming on Twitch.
I don't think I'd actually be playing the games on this stream, to be honest. It's fun.
I've had a couple people tell me I should, because I do play, not a lot, but I play some video games. Layer! Nice. All right, we got it. High five. Good job.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, in this case, this one isn't going to work, but this shows that points can hover, and these can be things as well. And
so what happens if you combine? So what is the middle person if you actually combine the three people?
I don't know. So who's good at Power BI is eligible for president and has an unusual love of Venn diagrams?
That's a good point.
Will Thompson.
Gotta yeah. there you go. Slap him in the middle.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get that to where it's not gonna. Yeah, it's not gonna do it. It does work. Anyway, and so Phil also did a lot of his own games, which I went through after I built this DAX game and learned a few things from as well. So this temple of DAX one, if it will load, is a pretty good example of the power of SVG.
Yep.
I don't know if anyone's seen this one. I think lots of people have seen it. But yeah, I'm talking to the game. Yeah, what do you mean? But with this is a maze, right? So this is all DAX and SVG, right? And this game here, you can move through.
This was my favorite that he did. It's basically Wolfenstein 3D or Doom or any of the old games.
Doom, all of that kind of stuff as well, right?
Pseudo 3D.
And then peeking in the back of this code was absolutely amazing. So again, another thing in that exploration.
It's so much fun.
Yeah, now I've got to work out where to go from there. So I guess, yeah, right. So I don't know if there's any questions before I sort of go on.
Just some of the word guesses from earlier. Otherwise, yeah, comments, couple trophies and cheers, but no questions at the moment.
Yeah, cool, no worries. So yeah, basically wrapping that up, right? So using those games to learn, to explore, to understand data visualization, build my own foundational knowledge through experience, right? Really did help me in my data visualization in the future, right? So when Deneb came along, having that understanding of SVG elements, sort of layering SVG elements, being able to modify the attributes and sort of animate those attributes and place them on a page in this coordination system really helped me step up into using Deneb as a custom visual in Power BI a lot quicker. And I mentioned before that there's a lot of charting libraries that use SVGs as part of their building blocks, and sort of Vega and Vega Lite was one of those. So when Deneb was a custom visual that was included in Power BI, I also explored that through play and games, and I'm not really going to walk through those as well. But again, you can see here in this sort of visual grammar, you've got all those marks and encodings, fill opacity and stroke widths and all of that kind of stuff as well. And I played with SVGs in, Deneb visuals as well. And other people have done the same. So creating a Pac-Man game, for example, this isn't my work, but somebody else's work. And then that made it really fun and intriguing to look into the code of that and sort of see if I could reverse engineer and see what was going on with that. So having this sort of exploration and this understanding and made it much easier to then apply this practically into my work. And I guess what enabled me to do that is the core visual updates that we spoke about earlier. So when those matrix went from being a square view box to a rectangular view box, and when that new KPI card visual came into effect, right, allowing SVG images as part of the background, was like, this is a great moment, right? Now I can apply all this knowledge that I've got and see if I can use them as visualizations in Power BI. So one of the differences with core visuals as opposed to the HTML content, right, there's a limited interactivity, so it won't recognize hover over or mouse over and those kind of things. It does allow some animations, but there's limited on tooltips and things like that. There's also some accessibility things, right? So you won't be able to get the underlying data. It's terrible for screen readers. One thing I learned with Deneb is amazing for screen readers. I've tested a screen reader over Deneb, and it's so descriptive. Yeah, it's so awesome. Descriptive. It's amazing. But a HTML content visual, the screen reader won't touch it. And the screen reader over Deneb was much better than the screen reader over a Power BI matrix. The difference was incredible to hear and see. And so with that knowledge, right, I also needed to think, okay, if I'm going to create charts with SVG in Power BI, I need to think about that accessibility, right? So, creating these whiz-bang, fully featured things is just not practical. But where they are practical would be in things like sparklines. Because, they're just for the view, they supplement, the information that's already there, right? They're just there just to see a quick trend. We don't need to delve in, we don't need to interact, we don't need to do, all of these things. And so that was sort of the most practical application of SVGs. So
anything that lets you turn a table into some type of a chart hybrid, graphical representation of values.
And what it does is it increases that information density as well, right? Within that. So these were some of the sparklines that I created with SVG in tables, and I really had some fun in doing this. And there's a lot more of this I'm planning on doing. I just haven't really had the time to go and research them. But some of my favorites here, like this waterfall, I think has got a lot of practical application, and data bars as well. So one of the things that you can't do with the spark lines natively in Power BI is you can't center the bars. Right, they all kind of come like this. So when you want to sort of view across a lot of columns, the proportion isn't quite right. Whereas if you were to center the bars and put an axis right down the middle, right, then you'll know that proportion's always going to be right. And the beautiful thing about the SVG images is because you can actually set the width, provided that your text isn't too long, the columns are all going to be the same width. Again, making that comparison and the proportionate view of the data much better than the native data bars.
A couple of questions just on some SVGs. So from Arun, he just wanted to know how do you see working with SVGs and writing complex DAX from a performance standpoint for how long it takes the visuals to load?
They usually render really quickly, as far as I can tell. So I guess depending on what goes into your DAX query, they're really quite performant. So if they're quite simple, they render in under a second. I don't think I've had any SVGs that take longer than that unless I've done a really dodgy DAX query, I'm doing all sorts of funky stuff in it. So the SVGs load better than, custom visuals will. So that's a good point to think about as well.
I think the number one perpetrator is going to be the level of detail in the visual. Like if you have a matrix table that's showing tens of thousands of rows of like sales transaction, but at that point it's the visual and the measures that are slowing everything down. It's but the rendering of the SVG code specifically, it seems like doesn't take a lot of time. It's really gonna mostly fall onto the speed of the measure inside of the SVG on whether or not it will be fast or slow.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess there's these are leftover pages. They're kind of gross.
Flapping Twitter bird. I mean, you really like the new card visual for sure. You've done a lot with those ever since that was released earlier this year.
Yeah, I haven't used them in production though. Not yet, anyway. But I've certainly played with them because they're always being updated. There's new features almost every month on those as well. So I go in and poke around a bit.
The one holdout that I'm waiting for it is like if you want like a KPI grid, you need a lot of measures for the current KPI card. But they're in their pipeline to small multiples. It's just not there yet. So as soon as they add small multiples, when you want to show a bunch of them, like that's going to be that like the kickoff for me to put that in a bunch of client reports, because they've iterated through stages with Miguel's team and it's been fantastic. But that one major tipping point for me will be that small multiples thing, which will reduce the number of model objects I need to like make a bunch of them at the same time quickly.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I find very, very useful. So I'm looking forward to that. At the moment, sort of trying to format each card individually is quite onerous. So having that small multiple thing will definitely help do that, and then reduce the visuals on the page as well.
Well, just on that subject, before you just move on, James had a quick question specifically on SVGs. You mentioned that you hadn't used the new cards yet. Is there any particular reason of not using the new cards for you in production, or just hadn't had the opportunity?
I still haven't been able to modify them the way that I want them to look.
Okay.
And I haven't really had a particular use for them yet. They are in preview, which is a bit of a touch and go thing as well. So but mostly I just haven't had a use for them yet and the functionality.
That's fair.
Yeah, so I've created all these spark lines and not actually used them myself. I've used them in tables, just not in the new kind of visual. So yeah, the DAX behind that. So here we've got our little polyline here we've got our stroke width, and then we've got those little XY coordinate points before. And so those are being filled out, with a table of values in the back. And, it's really quite easy to add to this. So I'm going to do this on the fly. It didn't work last time. We should be able to add just a simple, and we would go, say, Y would be at this point probably, if we've got the height of 50, make it Y equals 20. There you go, you can test my knowledge live.
Oh, and I need to take this off.
Okay. Yeah. No, I don't want there. Hang on. It's not going to work, it's going to break. Oh no, you can't see it. Or I probably picked up the wrong measure. Anyway, let's move on. But that will be a way to sort of modify those SVGs as well. And then so building those microcharts, playing with Deneb, building that knowledge, getting that experience, playing around has sort of got me to where I am today in terms of dashboard design. Mm-hmm. So here we've got a very plain page, which is sort of the core visuals of Power BI. Looks kind of nice. I don't have any problem with it. I think it's very pretty. But you can add to this, you can enhance it, you can add more context and so on. So it's going to take a while to load. Shouldn't take a while to load. Using custom visuals to, we probably don't need to do that anymore here because there's been new functionalities, but to change the shape and the balance of a dashboard beyond what's available in the core visual designs.
Now the upper left logo, how long have you had that one?
The graphic insights logo?
Yes, because the diamond's been around for a couple of years, but this one's newer.
Yeah, this one's a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So the diamond is sort of for my personal sort of blog. The graphic insights is my freelancing initiative, so to speak.
I think it's a brain, right? It's supposed to be?
Yeah, also the logo is it's a brain and a question. So it's about graphic insights asking questions. So it's supposed to look like a little bit like a brain and a question mark. And then you've got the networks and nodes and the visualization and the inside of it. So it's supposed to be a play on a visual play on multiple words there, concepts. And so the brain, indicating intelligence and all that as well. And again, so bringing in those SVGs into the table. I've lost what I was going to say, but I'll just go through. And if anybody has any questions or want me to have a look at these or demonstrate anything, like sing out.
Usually a common one that somebody will eventually put in the comments will be where can I get a copy of the PBIX if it is something that you can share.
I won't be sharing the PBIX of this one. I can share the PBIX of the microcharts.
That would be perfect then. Yeah, because a lot of people like to go poke around and play with some of the stuff themselves into a sandbox, and so whenever I'd say feel free at any point to give me a link to it if it's hosted somewhere on your website, and then I can reference back to that, so that way at least it creates a funnel for people to go to your site to download it.
Yeah. So I think we're kind of at time, and
so it's always like a soft hour. So if there's anything as we're wrapping up, and I also have a few questions still to bring up. But if there's anything left you want to show, this table's pretty interesting here. It's heat map, but with a size of the box instead of the actual color. Well, it's both technically, but that looks really cool.
Yeah, so that's a Deneb custom visual here. So it's triple encoded squares. So yeah, it's the days, the hours, and then, you know, size and color encoding in terms of the magnitude of views.
That's cool.
Across those times. And then we've also got the bars as well, so we can see, you know, which hours are the most and which days are the most frequently as well. So yeah, so it's just sort of a little glimpse into you know, where all this learning and all these games have taken me in terms of dashboard design.
And it's all the dark mode as much as possible.
I prefer light mode. I don't think I've built one darkish one in production before, and I didn't like it. I don't. So one of the things that I've learned from is speaking with users and consumers, and as a consultant as well, is I've done a lot of workshops where I've sort of presented an array of different sort of dashboard designs with data visuals of varying levels of extraction and different layouts and colors and themes, and everybody always gravitates towards the plain white background, the 4 to 5 visuals on the page, some summary text, and very high contrast colors. And they prefer the simple. They don't mind the complex ones. They can read them, they can understand them and interpret them, but they prefer the simple pie charts, bar charts. I think I mixed some words then. Pie charts, bar charts, and area charts, and so forth, and really simple, like, and a lot of white space. And that's just people's preference for dashboard designs, right? They, you know, web, like these dark backgrounds are good for like web or like, you know, watches and, you know, phones and things like that. But in general business, a white background is always preferred with no fuss. I
agree.
With a simple title, a line underneath the header, you know, no fussy gradients or images or iconography, because iconography can cause clutter. And if the icons aren't consistent in style, it can be really quite, you know, distracting and things like that as well. So, but this is fun. So I do these dark modes in my own time. It's quite a skill, because with dark mode, you need to get, there's a much more limited color palette that you can use, and you need to get the contrast really, really good. So it's very, very high contrast. With light mode, you can lower the contrast, and that's probably why I generally prefer it, because, you know, I'm kind of photosensitive and I prefer the lower contrast. With dark mode, you need a very sort of high contrast, sort of much more limited palette, and that's why the gradients are more alluring in a dark mode dashboard, because it adds an extra layer of variation to your color palettes and stuff. So you can mix the colors a little bit more to create a bigger variation in color palette, if that makes sense. It
does. Well, and it's also from the, as you said, like the colors, the contrast scales. What can you remind me the number for accessibility? It has to be a ratio of like, is it like it's 4 something to 1 or whatever? Like any adjacent colors that are touching should always be at least a minimum of this like contrast from the next one. But it can be harder to get that, but also not have a color that looks very garish when you have that on those. From an eye strain perspective, though, I love them because they're literally easy on the eyes. Like it's less bright light staring at you when I have to look at a computer monitor for 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
Couple questions that are. Go ahead.
Yeah, keep going.
I was gonna say I have a couple questions that I wanted to pop up. One was from Fernando. So he just stumbled upon the topic of design versus functionality. He's seen that design is such an important topic that sometimes it grabs all of the attention, even disregarding the actual figures and data. And then he has a just final follow-up of like, what do you think on this topic?
It depends on what your use for it is. It's always one of those context things. So if you're just doing something for just a quick analysis, and you just need to understand the data, get some insights from data, like the design's not ultimately that important. But if you're going to put something in place for a bigger audience, you know, it needs to be used. So if you know it's going to have a long life cycle, because a lot of reports have short life cycles, a couple of months, 6 months, they're there for a particular purpose. They answer a question, and you don't need them, some strategic initiatives, or you've got a new tender or whatever that you're working towards, right? It's just a report you want to splash up for a short period of time. But if it's something that's going to have high use, the audience doesn't understand necessarily the data behind it, right? It needs a lot of explanation and narrative. And if you're a consultant also, the function and design is really, really important, because the design is what, so if you're going to present something to an executive rather than your colleagues, right, design is really, really important, because what that does is that gives confidence, right, in the data and in the output. If there's things that distract from that,
Yep.
people are going to have less confidence. They're going to ask more questions. They're going to go, where'd you guys get data from? Is it quality? All of that kind of stuff. And if you've got a perfectly designed dashboard, one, it looks like this money well spent. It looks like people have put time into the back end of it, right? And that it's going to contain good data. So it's one of those situational things.
What's it? Visualizations is art and science, right? Because a huge part of it is audience, like to the degree that I like to start from zero, an empty canvas, and you add one thing at a time, and every time you add something, is it adding value? But added value is super subjective. Like some people might, on the report that we have in front of us, new users, like the horizontal grid lines that help to show kind of the quadrants, sections of of scale. We have your lower third, middle third, upper third on the new users chart. So you can just I find that there's added value of just seeing the breakup of the values between each of those sections. You could pull 30 users who look at this, and every one of them could say, you know what, I find that useless. It doesn't tell me anything, depending on what they have with the data. So it's definitely a mix of, I think, left brain, right brain when it comes to designing those things. But I find that the most important thing afterwards is I put anything into here that I think is going to be useful, but I make sure to get tons of feedback from people on what they should, or what they want to see, because it as much as I might have a recommendation, end of the day, they're still kind of the final sign off on whether or not something works or doesn't. And I don't want to give them anything superfluous on the page that adds, to quote Edward Tuff, like chart junk, something that's there that adds no value. So I try to have it as minimalistic as possible while still having them been able to answer their questions as quickly as possible. Anything less than that is not enough information. Anything more than that is too much information and too high of a cognitive load. So there's a Goldilocks spot that you have to hit. But I think I truly think that a lot of that, even if you've made 1,000 reports, you're never going to get to that Goldilocks until you get at least a few rounds of feedback on what does or doesn't work. Usually with sometimes having to give the client, like, here's 3 charts. Which one of these is the easiest for you to read? Like if you just tell them verbally, you could have this chart or that, but if you show it to them, it's usually it clicks. Oh, like number 2, like that just speaks to me so much better than the other ones.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Another question from James, back onto the light and dark. Have you ever found an easy way to add a light and dark mode toggle to the page so people can actually choose which they want?
So I hate bookmarks.
I was going to say without bookmarks.
One of the things, I think it shouldn't be done on the report canvas. I really feel that there should be a way of doing. So you've got those high contrast modes in the service where you can change, for accessibility. Yes. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could just flip through those and go, I want to look at it in sepia because my eyes are tired today, and have that. I don't know how that would work, but as an experience.
The only other thing I could think of is you can upload one custom theme at a time. It would be great if in that library of themes that you have, where it's broken up, if you could add multiple of your own custom themes in that list, but then also there should be a way via a slicer selection to just pick a word and have it automatically just change to a theme. That's the only other, it's a dream world. I've only done it with bookmarks, I think, as you have, where you have 2 versions of a page and you just go from light to dark. But being able to let user selectable themes that you've pre-built
Mm.
would
Wouldn't
be
that be
really nice.
amazing? Because that's the thing
Yeah.
about accessibility, right? Is that you'll have people with different accessibility needs and they be in conflict with each other, right? So somebody that has, low vision with someone that's photosensitive, right?
Hmm.
Low vision needs really high contrast and photosensitive needs lower contrast and they conflict. And so you can't cater for everybody. So wouldn't that be wonderful?
It's one of those pipe dreams that would be really great to have
Mm.
at some point in the future with that stuff. I would say like if Will Thompson was still on here, but he hasn't been in charge of the desktop for a couple of years now. He's over having fun with data activator. As Oh no, yeah, and like last question, I want to make sure not to miss this. This was from Edward, a bit earlier in the call, but do you have any tools to help you create SVG code? So yeah, just any code assist, I guess, devices outside of that play box that you showed earlier.
No, I hadn't typed them. I reference some certain websites occasionally when I've forgotten. I did today. Um, but no, I tend to hand type them. They're okay.
Okay,
So that, yeah, the one that I showed earlier was probably a really good one for people.
because it does have a
Uh,
lot of samples, so at least you can poke around in the pre-generated code to a degree there.
yeah, I mean, Notepad and Visual Studio might help sort of highlight because you can color code the text. Help me out. What's that called?
Um, in Visual Studio, the,
Yeah, but yeah, so they will help
yeah.
sort of make it easier to read. And then I think some of the add-ins for Visual Studio will predict or have the available valid entries.
James mentioned it was syntax highlighting.
That's the one. Thank you.
Hmm. Uh, what other question actually? We can use this to maybe we'll use
Oh,
Henry's to wrap up.
and there's some add-ins to Visual Studio that will display the SVG as well. I've seen those. I've not used them, but I've seen them.
That's what I do love about Visual Studio Code, at least the amount of add-ons from the community that are in there.
Mm.
Henry wanted to know, have you tried using any SVG animations with your visuals, or are there any drawbacks to do it? Okay, yeah, so I guess like what's the degree of animation that can be done with SVGs in Power BI? Like actual like animation.
Um, so you can, with the HTML content visual,
Yep.
you can be creative and create some nice landing pages or information pages. So if, for example, you wanted to create how do you use this report, you can create little clicky buttons to toggle through informational pages, for example, within like a little iframe on your page, right? So it doesn't
Yep.
take up the whole thing. And then you've got, rich text formatting on those. And, you can animate those buttons as you click through, and that'd be quite potentially handy. But having animations on the visuals themselves, so there is some use, practical use for animations in data visualization, but they generally should be avoided. And animations, in vector styles, in paths, I think one of the well-known one is that Hans Rosling data visualization is probably the most well-known example of how animation and data visualization can be useful, but just needs to be done with caution. So I wouldn't do it for aesthetic. I would
Yeah, okay.
do it for enhanced understanding, I guess.
Sounds like something that's like at least is not easily accomplished without a lot of added complexity.
You can do animations on the spark lines, but every time the page renders, they'll reanimate. Every time you cross highlight, they'll reanimate.
Yep, because it has to reload everything. So
Mm.
that's why you can't have a smooth transition from state A to state B with like slice selections, like a smooth animation that does something else, because it has to basically it's reloading the image each time.
Mm. Yeah, and there
Okay.
will be no control. So there's with animation, we're going to be careful sometimes because when people get motion sickness, that they can have controls to stop the animation. So within the core visuals, we can't do that. So you just need to be conscious of that as well.
That's fair. Okay. I mean, yeah, I always try to keep considerations for accessibility or anything along that, then call out. As we're wrapping up, is there anything else, any insights, key takeaways you want to give to anybody as we close off?
No, I just want to see everybody else's uses of SVG and how they've applied them. I'm really excited to see what people do. So keen for people to share and and see some other games, because I quite liked my Wordle game, having played it 2 years later. So it'd be nice to see other people make some fun games.
And James just wants to say, appreciate this was interesting and funny. He feels inspired now, so.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Excellent. Well then, Kerry, this has been fantastic. Thank you for taking time from the future out of your Saturday morning to join for this one. And always good to have you back. And at any point in the future, I will happily bring you back on to talk shop again on anything visual related. So.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe a practical walkthrough on something. Or yeah.
They're even with creative stuff. You get a lot of inspiration with a mix of practicality. So it's a little of both halves of the coin.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Awesome. All right, everybody, enjoy. It's my Saturday. I'm gonna go out and do some fun things after I tidy my house.
Enjoy the rest of your Saturday morning. Yeah.
Will do. All right. See you guys.
All right. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships or our merchandise store for cool swag. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help our channel grow. So, until next time.